And you're like, yeah, yeah. He talked about the sun. He talked about the trail, and he talked about the water. And I didn't tell you about the trees and the logs and the rocks and all this other stuff that was there. And all of this stuff contributed to the experience. And you're like, yeah, but none of that matters. And yet all of it does. And that's the thing about art. That's where it's like, none of it matters, and yet all of it does, all at the same time. And this is where I want to go back to my initial point. Perception and interpretation. What did you notice? What did you put your attention on? What did you care to recognize during that experience? And also, did you acknowledge that that experience was the one and only time you'll ever have that experience? And it is born and died all at the same moment. This is Way of the Artist with Brandon Colby Cook and Evan Schulte,
exploring the challenges of the creative call
so that you can claim your own path
and make your life a work of art. Well, thank you, everybody. If you're listening to us once again, here we are. It's Evan and it's Brandon, and we got a conversation today diving into what I think is going to be some interesting territory. Excited to be doing like a topic that's like, it's got art in the title of this podcast. I think we try and incorporate like an artful sort of element to all of our conversations, but this one we're going in with that as like kind of like a direct area of focus in this one. So we're calling this one Art is the Language of the Soul. And the thing that kind of got me inspired about this conversation is that, we live in this kind of world and a culture and a society where we really seemingly we place the most sort of importance on our logical, rational sort of brain and a way of thinking about things, which I'm not knocking that because it's an extraordinarily useful side of things, but that it's really only at most half of the equation. It's only half of the whole thing, in that art deals with this other thing that isn't entirely rational, that is a little bit strange and sometimes mysterious, that subjective experiential part of life that we can't just logic our way through. And if you think that this isn't important, well then just think of how much art you consume on a day-to-day basis, right? The music that you listen to, the movies that you watch, the books that you read, right? These things are all pieces of art. And so why do we turn to these things? Why do we need these things, right? Where we live so much in this logic-based way of approaching the world and our lives, and yet there's this component where we have to have these things in our lives. And so I'm excited to talk about how and potentially what are these things that art deals with and why it's important.
Something that comes up for me right away is interpretation and perception, because I feel like story is so much about interpretation and perception. And I know like story is just an element of art, but I feel like story is one of those things where that's a lot of the myth of what we talk about. And we make things mean stuff, and we often use story, and then naturally through story we use character. And actually, it's an interesting thing because, when I teach storytelling, something that, I had people ask me before is like, shouldn't we start with a movie concept or a story concept before we ever build a character? And, I was telling them like, I mean, you can totally do that. You can go like, oh, I have this idea for like, aliens come down and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, okay, it's all great. But what you'll find is if you don't create character at some point, and some point soon, you'll find you'll end up with a plot-driven story, which is that events happen and carry the story forward, and it's just event after event after event. And we see this sometimes in actually big movies, and we're like, why did that movie suck? Because it was plot-driven, not character-driven. And the thing is, I always say, like, at a certain point, and it's probably sooner better than later. Let's get into character, because character drives your story and will inform the events that happen because of the actions they take, which will let you know what needs to happen in the story for it to play out.
Mm-hmm.
And why I bring this up is because in our lives, we tell stories about our lives and we have interpretations and perceptions of what's going on. But at the end of the day, all that matters is the people involved. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's so interesting that you took it to where you did, because it's something that I think it's almost a perfect metaphor for the thing that we're talking about. And also, metaphor is, again, one of the only ways that we have to talk about these things, right? And about that sort of reality of experience that we live in is, and art is, how art is that language, right? It's, as much as the rational side of us tries to explain a lot of these things, there's something that's always just missing. And so the language that we have for that is through art and metaphor. But anyhow, getting a little sidetracked, although I like that sidetrack. It's interesting what you bring in, because it's like, sort of telling a story, and we'll just use movie making for this one, or writing a script. And you're talking about plot driven versus character driven. And I know that I have heard discussions of how, some are more plot driven, some are more like, I think I remember hearing Martin Scorsese talking about how The Departed, he said, it's like, this is more of a plot driven movie, but there's still characters in it. There's still some pretty great characters, like really wild characters in it. But in that sort of thing, I'm like, okay, plot, character, you've got this another kind of duality, right? But they exist together, right? They go together, right? And in some ways, plot is like the rational mind, the logical mind. Character is the subjective mind, is like, it's or left brain or right brain, if you want to think of it in those terms. And the plot provides all kinds of interesting events, but story is not just about plot, because it's character, at least in my view. Character is the thing that makes you go, why do I care about these things that are happening?
Yes.
Right? Because just things that are happening is like, it can be interesting to a point.
Mm-hmm.
But at a certain point, you go, but why do I care?
Right.
If I don't give a shit about the character that all of this stuff is happening to, then why am I, what am I doing here?
Mm-hmm.
Right? If I don't care about that. So it's like, I think that it just struck me as an interesting sort of allegory, metaphor to this whole conversation, where it's like, like these things exist together and they're both important, but there's a certain reality that one of them brings to the equation, that you can't just ignore it. You can't just wish it wasn't there. Yeah.
Well, I mean, what makes plot interesting is character. So if I say, for example, someone got stolen from, that's a plot point, right? But if I say your grandma, who is 86 years old, went to the market, and a young boy who was a drug addict clubbed her over the head and stole her purse. All the clubbing over the head, the whatever, that's all plot. But the thing is now you're starting to know these people. Now it starts to have context. It's more interesting, right? And you can totally change this, because you can say, well, you could do something really weird, you could flip it, and so the little boy went to the market and the lady smashed him over the head with her purse and stole this candy, and you're like, what? What kind of weird situation is that? But you see it, the interpretation of it, right? The character is so much of the interpretation. And so plot does have to happen, because when you have these stories without plot, they don't, nothing happens, and so then they become boring and they become a bit of a lull. So plot is definitely important in all of this. And but the character is why we care. And I think character. Keep that in mind as you're telling a story. And if you think about any story that's in your own life, you care because it's you, right? And you are the character, and whether you even if you don't like yourself and you think you think horrible things about yourself, you still care because you're the one experiencing it. And the thing is here, I'll take this one step further. If you can resonate with a character or the character, you'll care even more. And that is the key thing, because the thing about character is when it's properly and effectively done, you somehow transcend into character, even though you're just watching it. So like any show that you like, any movie that you watch, there's some degree of fascination or relationship or connection to character. Even if it's like this mafioso boss or something like in The Sopranos, and you're like, well, I don't even know what that's like. But then it's like, I get a struggle. I feel like I'm there with them. I understand this. And that, helps you to connect to these story events. But if, Tony Soprano was not as relatable, and there was something that wasn't like, if it wasn't grounded in a certain type of truth, The Sopranos would never really work quite the way it does. It would just be kind of an interesting mafia show, but it's not. It's so much more than that.
Yeah.
And to further the point, and this is, some people might disagree with me, but the end of The Sopranos, which I'm not ruining anything here yet, but a lot of people are like, oh, I don't like the ending. The thing about the ending of that show, and look, it's really hard to end a show like that, first of all. And I'm not going to say that they did it the best possible way they did. And it's for those of you who said, well, they could have done this or that. Okay, great. At the end of the day, what I feel like you get when you finish that show is you go, this is what it's like to live that life. With, we like to think of like, oh, the big scams they pull, and this guy's a rat and we got to kill him. And we always think of those moments. Those are the highlight moments of like mafia life. And everybody's like, oh yeah. But the day in the life of living that life is you're always looking over your shoulder, and you never know. And it's dangerous. And there's a foreboding quality that exists there. And a lot of people, they miss that, right? But if you really take a second to like kind of like watch that ending and really kind of like sit in those moments they give you at the end, you realize like, yeah, like we've been watching this whole show, we haven't thought about that at all. And then on the last episode, they go, hey, by the way, there's no happy ending here. Like, you chose this life feels like this every fucking minute of your life. So just because things seem like they're good and all these plot events are kind of worked out to some degree, this is still what it's like to sit in his shoes and his family's shoes and everyone else's shoes and blah, blah, blah. And then, boom, it leaves you. And you're like, ugh, right? There's like, it sends chills down my spine to think about that. Because the thing is but a lot of people, they want that plot driven kind of wham, bam, like this is what happens. This is the end. Okay, see you later. But people didn't necessarily love the idea that you were left with a feeling of reality, right? Or perceived reality, let's say, because, it's debatable. But the point is that if you really connect to character, there's nuance, there's qualities, right?
Yeah.
And I think, I don't want to focus entirely on story because I know that's not entirely the point of this. But I do think that the logical part of us loves plot. We love events and we love moments. We don't necessarily always put our attention on nuance and character perception and interpretation. But I feel like part of what this conversation is the nuance, the perception and interpretation. That is the communication of soul and self in a way that we don't always talk about.
Yeah. And it's like the hard, like plot in some ways, there's a part of us that is attracted to just give me like the hard facts of it.
Yeah.
Right. Which is kind of like what the plot is, what happens.
Yeah.
It's like, that's has a compelling element to it. But the thing that we're still always looking for is how does the person respond to what's happening? Who is the person who is responding to it? And where do they end up going with it? How are they transformed by the events that go on, right? This is
and what do they choose to do based on their transformation?
Yeah,
which is a key point.
Yeah, and that's really like coming back to that whole thing of art is the language of the soul, right? Like that's that quality of trying to describe something that is kind of indescribable. Like you can't just, because really story is trying to talk about something that you can't just speak about directly.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you can't just,
Well,
because
you can, but you won't get
you
it.
can, yeah. It's like it's like trying to
Explain the color red.
yeah, or it's you know, there's this exercise, I think I read it in one of Alan Watts's books or something like that, but it was, you know, try and describe, like, go outside and look at a plant of some sort of flower or a tree, and it's like describe that thing without describing its parts. Right? Like because that's what our language does. It breaks things up into all of these pieces. It doesn't do wholes.
Right.
Right? It doesn't do unities. It doesn't do that thing. It's just it breaks things apart, right? Which is has a useful function. But then there's when you're sort of challenged, like, well, describe it without describing its parts, and you're left in just a kind of speechless presence with something.
Yeah.
Because you just have to be with it, and you have to now experience the tree. You have to experience the flower without concepts and words, and it's an interesting exercise to do in terms of just creating a sense of connection and intimacy with something, and instead of reducing it down to something and really being with it. But yeah, the story is about doing this. It's the same thing in its own kind of way. It's like, well, we have to do these sorts of things in order to talk about certain things about what it is to be alive, what it means to be a human, what it means, like these are big things that you know, our sort of rational or scientific language, it just doesn't have the capacity for. And there are people who continue to attempt to do so, and I applaud them for that. And I won't even say it's a useless endeavor or exercise, but I truly wonder if it's something that will never be able to be accomplished. But that's okay.
Yeah.
You know, like that's the thing. It's like our sort of our language and rationality is great at describing and explaining certain types of things. It's okay for it not to be able to do certain other things. That's why, again, this conversation that we're having, we have a language about talking about these things. It exists. It exists in poetry and metaphor and music and art. Like these, how just a sound, you know, a musician can just do an instrumental thing, and it can just make you burst into tears. Like, what the fuck is that about? You know what I mean? Like like how do you name that thing? Right? You can't. You couldn't put that into words. You couldn't just say words to people. It's like, well, you are experiencing some kind of emotional
but that's just
catharsis.
describing
And
it.
I know exactly.
It's
like
just observing it and saying, well, I see tears coming from your eyes. Like, I mean, it's about as valuable as that. But it doesn't make tears come from anyone else's eyes because they're not experiencing it. And how is that person going to even express, like, oh wow, something hit me, and I don't even know why it hit me.
Yeah, and for someone to imagine a moment in your life if what, you know, I just described, a piece of music just like suddenly making you, you know, and yeah, there could be events going on in your life that have, you know, contributed to all of that, but can you imagine somebody just coming along and trying to reduce that emotional experience, that cathartic emotional experience to you in some sort of rational way? Well, you're feeling that way because you're tired and you're, you know, you just had this event, and yeah, all of these things, but there's still there's something almost insulting about that. There's something that is almost, it's that degrades and diminishes the experience, right? And is a little bit annoying and irritating about that sort of viewpoint. If you can imagine somebody and now analyzing, your an emotional experience that you're having, right? That just robs it, I think, of so much of its beauty. And I think that beauty is a big part of this conversation too. I mean, art and beauty are like those are two things that are hand in hand.
Yeah. I think when you get too logical, you end up living a very dry life, very dry and boring, and there's a vacancy to it all. And I do think that there is a time and a place to be logical and practical, where it's like, look, we got a job to get done. We got to get this done. We have a time frame. Let's lock it down. Let's be specific. And I do think there is a time and a place for all of that. The question that I ultimately have, though, is why? Why are you doing any of the stuff that you're doing? Why does this job matter? Why do you care if you get it done on time? What does it matter if it's done at 95% quality or 100% quality or 70% quality? Why do you care about that? Why does that matter? Something that's coming up obviously is, what's the key thing I keep asking? Why? Which is a philosophical pursuit ultimately. Why? Mm-hmm. Kids are very philosophical. Why is the sky blue? Why do rainbows happen? Why is the trees leaves fall off? And they want to know why. I want to understand what's going on here. And I think that we do default a lot to logic and science for why. And I do think that's valid. And I think this is a big part of our talk. We're talking about how there's a certain amount of let's just understand naturally, why does this exist?
Yeah.
But then there's this other thing is why did I cry when that part in the movie happened, or when that song sounded that way, or when my partner said this thing, or why did I get angry, or why did this other emotion occur? And and then there's this thing where we'll try to go, well, when I was a kid, my parents didn't really pay attention to me, and we try and explain it away. But then you go, okay, well, that now. You should never cry about anything like that ever again, right? Because now you're aware. But yet we do.
Yeah.
Yet we do, and sometimes we do harder the next time. And sometimes the awareness of it actually activates more emotion.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a part of, our logical, practical selves where we feel a little threatened by this. We're like, well, I can't explain it, and I don't understand it, and that's frightening. And so, well, why are you frightened by the unknown? There's a good question. Why? Why are you so fucking freaked out about this shit that you don't understand and you can't explain? And and there's an art to that. And your soul, if you want to call it that, your sense of internal self, whatever that is, that can't make sense of this world, is freaking out all the time. And so we're constantly going back to logic and science to go I know this is what's happening. And it's yeah, but there's a certain element, no matter how far you go down that road, you're not going to be able to explain it.
Yeah, I would say in many ways it contributes to that sense of anxiety.
Sure, yes.
About it, because it's because you're trying to grasp this thing with this thing that you can't grasp it with.
Yes.
It's like a fishnet, right? You throw into the water trying to catch the water.
Yeah,
you know
totally,
what I mean?
Yeah,
There's this whole thing that's just slipping right through it.
Yeah.
Right? And you're only going to pick up little bits of it, which is
logic and practicality has holes.
It
has holes in it, and it leaks. It's leaky in the sense that it just lets certain things through, and you can't. It can hold on to it in little bits for a moment, and then it'll be gone again, and you're I thought I had it.
And it's this is maybe this is some of the crux of this conversation to me, and why I feel so enlivened by it. But it's because I feel to such a large degree as a society, we have lost our sense of that importance in art, where we think of more so, how many times I hear people talk with someone well, just entertain me. Like it's all just about just entertain me, right? And don't get me wrong, I think that entertainment is a terrific way for us to talk about things. In fact, because if it wasn't entertaining, then we're not gonna stay through for the whole thing to see, to get the deeper conversation, right?
Mm-hmm.
It needs to be entertaining. But when it just becomes about, it's like, no, it just needs to entertain me. It's like we've lost this sense of, to a large degree, not entirely, but I feel like we've lost to such a large degree the deeper meaning of what art is supposed to have in our lives, which is like this thing that's asking us to engage with life in a deeper way than we might normally be doing. Like sometimes art is a bit of a smack in the face. It's a little bit of a like shaking you. It's like, hey, wake up, right? Wake up. Remember something about yourself. Remember that you're not just this cog in this machine of our society right now, where everything is just, has to, be nice and uniform and in its place and da 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 da. Oh, there was one thing, I ended up, I think the fishnet thing kind of sufficed, but like another image that came to mind was, it's like trying to fill a circle with like an octagon. Does that make sense? Like
Okay,
imagine
yeah,
an
yeah.
octagon inside of a circle.
Sure, I just
right?
missed
It just it touches points.
Right.
It touches points of it.
I love that. That's a good analogy.
But there's it doesn't fill the whole thing out, and this is what I think is just so important about this conversation, and why I want, I guess, more people to have this kind of conversation and engaging with the kinds of art that you engage with on a deeper way, is because it provides more of the picture, right? And I think that we've forgotten that. I think that we minimize its function in our in our life, in terms of helping us find meaning, helping us find connection to ourselves and to the world on a greater level.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not to the exclusion of the other. It's an inclusive thing, right? Like we can understand rationally our world around us and within us, while at the same time still having the sort of mysterious, more less tangible realities to our life, that just because they're not as tangible and explainable doesn't mean that they're any less real. And that's what art, I think, is so concerned with.
Yeah. This analogy you used of the octagon inside of a circle, or inside of a, I'm thinking even a triangle inside of a square, like, or a circle or whatever. It's just like,
use whatever geometry you want.
Exactly, but the shapes don't. And I think this is one of the key things I think about this conversation, is that we're trying to match things with a shape that's not the same shape as something else. And by doing that, we'll always miss key elements to the whole thing. And, I think this is where that, you're hitting points, but you're missing this whole element. That whole element that's like kind of unattainable, like you can't really get it. That's the experience, that's the art, that's the part where you go off and you have to experience and explore. And there's no, like, I can tell people about experiences and journeys I've had. There's no way I could ever really truly fill them in, because there's a certain element of it where I can give you a point that happened, but that experience that I was having, and the day that was going on, and all the elements, and and like, for example, I was thinking the other day, like, I drove my motorcycle out to this, I don't know, down this road. I'm like, let's go see what I find, and I drove down this road, and I got to the end, and then I was like, oh, there's a trail there. Let me park my bike, and I walked down the trail, and it's just like hidden little cove on the coast, like probably almost nobody knows about except maybe the people that live in the area. I was like, well, this is a beautiful little gem. And the sun was where the sun was at that time of day, and the water was at the height it was on the beach, and also it was at a certain calmness that it was at, which it might not always be at. There's all these elements going on, and you're like, yeah, he talked about the sun, he talked about the trail, and he talked about the water, and I didn't tell you about the trees and the logs and the rocks and all this other stuff that was there, and all of this stuff contributed to the experience. And you're like, yeah, but none of that matters, and yet all of it does. And that's the thing about art. That's where it's like none of it matters, and yet all of it does, all at the same time. And this is where I want to go back to my initial point: perception and interpretation. What did you notice? What did you put your attention on? What did you care to recognize during that experience? And also, did you acknowledge that that experience was the one and only time you'll ever have that experience, and it is born and died all at the same moment? And like, I think there's people probably on the other end of this, we're going, who the fuck cares about any of that? This is like well, you're fucking talking in circles, and yet it's like, look, if your life was just fucking points, it would be nothing. It would be empty. It would be this vacant shell of a thing. And the thing is that, do you care about anything? And if you do, that's where you fill in those blanks. And because you care about something, and I care about something, which might not be the same thing, we notice different things, and those fill in the colors and the shades and the elements of this, where it's not just plain and boring. And we're not just machines of zeros and ones or black and white type thinking. We're shades and colors and nuance. And so, this is your soul. This is the thing that I think at the, what I've come to at this point in the conversation. Like, your soul is that refraction of nuance, of perception and interpretation. And that's you. That is you, in the sense that that is you, like, through your body, through your eyes, through your ears and sense of touch and smell and everything. That is what it is taking in through its filter. And mine is doing something else. And if we can respect that and everybody else and go like, wow, I'm filtering all this shit. And just don't be so arrogant to think that someone's filtering the same thing you are. They're filtering something else, and just be in wonder about, wow, this other person might be here filtering through entirely different filters that I'm not even aware exist. And then we can start to see the magic and incredible elements of every other person in this entire world experiencing, the art of life. Yeah.
Oh man, there's just there.
But who the fuck cares, right?
Yeah. No. Well, I mean, here's the thing. Is that the thing that's coming up for me is that art, really great art wakes us up to the experience of our own lives, right? Because as you're saying,
quotable.
Because there's what you were saying also made me realize it's like, oh yeah, but like the art is also in the same conundrum, is that in that it is also a a pentagon in a square or a circle or however you want. It's also only providing, it can only go so far as well, right? But art is the thing that's very much concerned with a certain part of human experience, right? And so it's having the conversation, right? It's having the dialogue, and that's what the artist is doing, is they're having a dialogue with their own lives and trying to touch something that's real and true, and then try and share that as honestly as possible. And as you're saying, the reader of a great writer's work, they're never gonna, like, they won't ever know completely exactly what that person's experience is that they're sharing, but they can still connect with it in a certain kind of way. We can still relate to the feeling in our own kind of way, and it can still bring us into our own lives in a meaningful way, right? But it can never it can never completely give you the experience of the artist who created it.
Right.
Right. But it can give you your own experience. Right. That's maybe kind of the same thing, something that you can still relate to. Right. But it's really all about, again, drawing you into your own life and asking you to engage and pay attention to your own life. It's just like, hey, look, yeah, this was my experience of on my motorcycle, and the things that were the beauty and the things that were around me and the moments that were transpiring there. When was the last time you just took in the beauty or the nature, the things that were around you, where you were just sucked into a moment that was, these moments that we have in life where all of our bullshit can just shut up for a second, because sometimes it's only for like a second or a couple of seconds, and we just find ourselves in a moment of, again, it's impossible to just say what it is, but it's like, it's a moment that's more real than what your everyday life is typically like.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like these moments where it's like, whoa, you're captured in a moment of such absolute clarity, beauty, something bigger. And you're experiencing it and you're feeling it, if only for a moment. And that's what art is kind of trying to do, is like trying to wake you up to those moments in your life. Like, to me, that's like some of the magic of that can happen in like a great film, or even like a great photograph of just, like a beautiful rain-soaked street or something in the night, or whatever it is, and it can just transport you to a place. It can show you a kind of magic, or it evokes something from you, and it's just like, well, how many rain-soaked streets have you walked on in your life, and how many times did you notice it? Did you notice and were just completely awestruck by the beauty that you were in at the moment, that maybe we missed because we were too busy thinking about some fucking bullshit of, some person said or something that happened before, but sometimes, like, the moment just grabs us, it just grabs us by the fucking face, and it's just like, hey, remember me, right? And that's kind of like, again, art is just like, remember me, right? Because an artist is trying to like share that, like, that experience that they had in some ways, right? And it's like, how much are we aware of that in our own lives?
Hey everybody, this is Evan, and this episode is brought to you by my book. Yes, I recently released a book called The Actor's Awakening: Connecting Spirituality to Craft. Expand yourself as an actor and your craft through a spiritual perspective. Take a journey that will explore universal philosophies and insights to help you understand human nature in a profound way, and develop practices to take your work to another level. Again, that's The Actor's Awakening: Connecting Spirituality to Craft. Available on Kindle and paperback on Amazon. And as always, if you like the show, please subscribe.
Man, like, it's interesting, like, going through this conversation, because there is a part of, I think, our daily lives and just our egos that just they get in the way of so much, right? It's like, I'm asking myself, it's like, why don't you walk around in every second of your life with just absolute gratitude and appreciation, And I do have these periods of time where I do that, and I'm just walking around, and I'm kind of just awestruck, and I'm just in the present moment as much as I can be, and I'm just like looking at stuff, and just like, wow, like, this is fucking amazing. It's incredible. And, and as someone wouldn't necessarily, like nothing spectacular is happening in the terms of plot. Except
Yeah.
except it's just me acknowledging beauty, and it's like the whole world is a painting, and the whole world is a song, and the whole world is a movie, and everything is always just it's all just there. And I'm thinking as we're working through this, I'm like, well, because we're talking about soul a little bit here, and I know that's a touchy word for some people, but like, does your soul die when you like not die, but in a sense dull because you get so caught up in bullshit like of like black and white like logic, And I think it does because I'm thinking about the times when I'm just like I was depressed or down, or even the times when I get so minutely focused on some real it's like some bullshit. And and I've heard people talk about this of like, could you be grateful for the fact that you're just so hurting right now, that you're so sad, that you're so angry? Could you be grateful that you have uh, a sensory system that can experience that,
Mm-hmm.
and just appreciate the fact that you're in an experience right now?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we get caught in stuff like, I know for me this is true, but I'm pretty sure it's true for everyone else, where you get into a difficult feeling or a difficult emotion and you're like, oh man, like this is never going to end. Like I am stuck here and I just want it to go away. And all you're focused on is like, when will this end? When will this be over? When can I pass through this one? And even if you do believe this too shall pass, you're like, but I'm stuck in it now and I can't get out of this fucking shit and I don't want to be here. But if you could just take yourself as almost a movie viewer and step out of that and like look at yourself and be like, appreciate someone living in your experience right now, whatever that might be. There's art in that. This kind of like, to me, so much of what art is it is actually like the looking into or the acknowledgement of something that you don't normally see. Because we're so focused on the points, Oh, like this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm up to, this is the thing. And then all of a sudden art goes, yeah, but like there's all this surrounding stuff that you're not looking at that seemingly doesn't matter. And yet it's the whole point. Because it's like, I mean, life is not just points. It's not just a series of actions and a series of events. It's experiences and it's acknowledgments and it's interpretations and perceptions all the way through it. And we write these things off like they don't even matter. And yet they're the only thing that really matters. And I think like, we've been talking a bit about this in the last one. We talked a bit about the machine and we've kind of like brought in that idea a little bit to this conversation. And it's like, yeah, the machine just wants you to fucking do the thing. Go to your job, be on time, do your work, get my money, pay for my house, drive my car. It's all this shit. Okay, but like you wake up in the morning, you're fucking bag tired, you don't want to get up, you drive through traffic, it's blocked up, it's slow, you don't like it, all this stuff's going on. But could you see the art in that? Could you experience that as though it was something incredible, like a child experiences it for the first time, and just be like in that, living? And I think these points, they erase all the life. It's like, I left my house and I got to work. What happened in between?
Mm-hmm.
And that didn't even matter to you. That was like a fucking just gone, just nothing, just, and yet we come back and we watch a show, a TV show or something, and then we tell our friends about, hey, did you see the latest episode of so-and-so or such and such? And it's like, oh, it's such a great thing. It's like, yeah, like, great. There's great plot events going on in their life, but like your life might not be that like exhilarating in plot, but you're still living it, And I'm not saying that your life's going to be more exciting than a tailored show or a tailored movie. But the thing is that there's a certain element where you can experience and enjoy your life and fulfill your soul in those moments that are seemingly unimportant, And yeah, I mean, I think like one of the things that I'm kind of recognizing as we're going through this is like how when we don't have art in our life, how vacant life becomes.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's kind of what I'm coming to. And the soul, if you want to call it that, is fulfilled by the art of your life. It's fulfilled by the present acknowledgement, the awareness to collect in the things that are seemingly innocuous and unimportant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, you were talking earlier in the conversation about, what was the movie you were talking about? And or no, you're talking about The Sopranos.
Oh yeah,
and how The Sopranos ended. And a thought crept up, and I just didn't need to be said at the time. But now it's kind of coming back up, which is, I was thinking about the ending of Inception. Christopher Nolan's just been rattling around in my head over the last couple of weeks. Anyone who's been listening to this the last few episodes, but it was I read this piece from like an interview that Christopher Nolan did, because people always ask him about the end of that movie, right? And spoiler alert if you haven't seen Inception, or well, maybe not so much, but like people always ask him about the top, that little thing that he spins on the table, and people are always asking him, it's like, did it fall or did it stay spinning? Like everyone wants to know, right? What happened? How did that thing? And he pointed this thing out, and he's like, no, I think, he's like, people always ask me this. He's like, and he's like, I feel like people are always missing the biggest thing about that ending, which is that he doesn't care. He's walked away from it. He doesn't care whether it's real or not. Right? Like it's, and I thought about it, I was like, geez, I've never thought about that. I've never thought about that side of it. And that's, again, I think kind of this whole thing between a rational mind. It's just like, just tell me what happened. Right?
Yeah.
Just tell me, like, was it real or was it not real?
Yeah. Then
right?
I can put it to bed and I don't have to think about it.
I don't have to think about it anymore. Which is why in so many ways the ending is so brilliant, because there's so much more richness to the story when you think about the fact that he doesn't care anymore. What is the significance of that? Like, I haven't even thought about that in part of that story. Right? But there's something within that if you explore that, there's like, whoa, yeah, what does that mean, that if he doesn't even care anymore? You know, like he's just happy that he is where he is, whether it's reality or he's still dreaming, right? That it doesn't concern him anymore. You know, there's a lot, that's a lot to process, right? But these are the things that great stories and great myths and great, like, they force you to do this kind of stuff. They ask you to engage with these things. And, you know, I think that we can often be very lazy about that kind of stuff because we're so sort of left brain focused, to put it in a very just blunt kind of a way.
We don't like the unknown. I mean, that's I think a big part of where art exists, though. It exists in this unknown.
But this is the thing, is that it's like, I think that the only reason we don't like it is because we've become like, it's like we've just been working out our upper body, you know, for the last
leg day,
however many generations,
totally,
right? And then suddenly it's just like, let's work our legs a little bit. And it's like, oh, this is hard. I don't have energy for this, right? I think it's a little bit like that, because we're not used to flexing those muscles. It's just, we're atrophied in engaging with it in that kind of a way. But like, we're only going to be stronger if we do start to engage with things, ask these questions, and not be as lazy about these kinds of stories. Because, you know, you think about just like other movies. I remember people were upset about like Castaway, for example. You know, it's like, what does he do? Where does he go at the end? You know, he's just at the end, you know, he's standing there at those crossroads and you don't know where he's going, and people debated about it and argued about it. It's like, and I think that's so great. You know, that ending that Robert Zemeckis, the way that he put that, it's like, yeah, have a conversation about it.
You know what I love about the ending of that movie, though? Like, here's the thing. Sometimes a movie ends and I don't know if this is true for you or other people, but I know for me, sometimes a movie ends and they leave it open-ended. And I'm so sure and so certain that it ended a certain way that I don't even, like, it's not even a debate. And I'm like, well, that's so interesting. Like, that's my perception. And like, I'm like, of course he goes back.
Yeah.
But it's, to me, that like, and to someone else, they may be like, of course he doesn't. Because he's on a journey of self-discovery or something else, and he's not going to get distracted by another woman, you know, or something. Like, who knows what they think, right? But to me, I'm just like, this is divine and perfect, and, you know, you go back, and that's what I would do.
Yeah.
But I just projected my shit onto him. That's all that happened, right?
And then
so
it's like,
but no, there's no proof that I'm right.
Yeah.
That's the thing, though. That's the unknowable, untangible thing. It's like, well, you don't know that exists, and I'm like, no, I don't. But in my world, it does, and so that's just my world.
Yeah, and that is almost revealing.
Yes, totally.
You know,
it's
like
revealing of me and my character,
exactly.
and people could read into that, and I could read into it. And,
it's just like, oh yeah, you're the romantic.
I'm the romantic.
It's
sure,
like, and because I'm the same way with the end of Castaway. It's like, he went back. He went back. You know, like, but yeah, for some people, it's like I had conversations with friends who, like, they were just so hung up on the fact that it didn't have a super clear sort of like, that was the decision, that was how it ended.
Put a bow on it, and you know, and life. The thing is that's the thing about art, right? Is like, we do like a bow, and I can appreciate a bow.
Yeah. But and there's nothing wrong with the bow, but every now and then the bow is
even when we get a bow, this is the thing. I think that we've gotten used and accustomed to a certain type of movie where we get a nice tidy bow ending, and we're like, okay, I know how things end, I know what the kind of result was, and like you know, and like, I don't even have to think about the fact that person's life carries on beyond this movie or beyond this story. It's just, it's done. You gave me a bow. I'm gonna move on, and I'm not gonna think about them ever again. I'm just going to go happily ever after, and I can just kind of live with that. Whereas sometimes a story or a movie, actually the book I just read, if anyone's ever interested in reading it, go pick it up at a used bookstore. I recommend you probably find it. Ordinary People does not wrap up with a bow. Not in the way that you would think, but fucking awesome.
Yeah.
The same way. Like, fucking awesome. Because it's like, that's so much like life. And it's just like, it's not clean. It's not perfect. And life's just this constant work in progress, and I think there's something exhausting about that. And I think that a lot of the time we get exhausted and we're like, just give me a fucking bow and tell me it's all going to be all right. You know, I think there's, and I can appreciate that, because I have definitely been at times in my life, just tell me that it's going to be okay and it's going to work out, because I'm so fucking exhausted, I can't carry on anymore. But there's also a part of life where it's like the adventure begins again once you get the bow. And sometimes these stories, they leave us with the next story in tow, and with no intention of ever even pursuing that story even. And we just get to live in the life. And sometimes I think like those endings are even better. I mean, I come to appreciate those more because I feel like the character lives on for me more. And the story lives on for me more. Whereas when you give me the bow, I can walk away and forget about it, and I never have to think about it again.
And I think the truly great stories, and again, great pieces of art, are the ones that they work on you. You know, like they leave some kind of a mark, and they make you think, feel in a way that you've maybe never have before, or they maybe reconnect you with something too. Like there's all kinds of ways in which I think that art can work on us, but like it works on you. And I think that just it's so strange that whole, you know, that tidy bow thing that a part of us so desperately wants. But I think that, again, that sort of, if we strengthen our capacity to engage with these mysteries a bit more, which again I think is very much like part of what art is. It's trying to talk about these things that are a little bit more mysterious in nature. Right.
Well, and, you know, here's something, and I don't want to cut you off, but here's an interesting thought to work out. No matter how much you think you know somebody, you truly do not know them, and we don't love that idea. I mean, I can understand why we don't love that idea. Because,
how much do we really know ourselves?
Good, right? Exactly. So, there's a whole pill to swallow. It's a big one. So then we go, okay, well, if I don't know this person, like everything I think I trust about them, everything I think I know about them could all be just vanquished in a moment, and it could. And so, here's something to do is like to look at every person all the time as a pursuit of understanding. And so like a good way to exercise this is if somebody say wrongs you and is willing to apologize. Okay. This is a very specific example. Sometimes people won't apologize. Sometimes there's all sorts of other things. But let's just say someone does something wrong or make a mistake or whatever, and they apologize. It would serve you and them best if you ask them, why are you sorry? They go back to that question, why? Why are you apologizing? Why do you feel the need to communicate this to me or whatever? And not as a thing of ego and pride. This is very, very important. Not as a thing of like, I want you to admit what you did wrong so I can fucking look over at you and say, hey, you fucked up. Not that, but as a desire to understand, to truly get, what is it about this that made you feel like, are you doing this as a lip service? Because sometimes people are. And that's good to know. Because if someone's just apologizing for some bullshit and they're like, yeah, I'm just saying sorry because it's the right thing to do. It's a polite thing to do. It's like, okay, that means nothing. Your sorry is fucking nothing. Like, I appreciate the fact that you're being polite, but in the scheme of our relationship, it builds nothing, does nothing, helps nothing, right? Fix the problem, then we'll talk about it, right? But if someone apologizes and you ask them, well, why? But you do it with compassion, empathy, and the desire to understand. Such an important part. Why? Why are you sorry? Like, really want to know. I go, well, like I see that I upset you. I said this thing. Like, I intended it this way. I didn't mean it that way. And you talk about it. Now that apology becomes this extremely bonding situation where it could bring you closer than you ever were before the mistake occurred. And then you become so grateful that they fucked up and made a mistake that you actually now have a relationship where it's like, look, if one of us ever fucks up, we're going to get closer from it. We're not going to get further apart. But how do most people react to mistakes? They actually create animosity or divide, and all these bad things come out of it. And they go, oh, well, they said sorry, but I really don't trust them now. Where it's like the person might go like, look, I did this thing, and like the thought that I might have actually damaged our trust or did something like that, like I really didn't want to do that. And here's what I was thinking, and this is why I did what I did. And then this outcome came, and I didn't expect that outcome. And now I see that it happened. And now that I see that it happened, I would never want to do that again. And you go, great. That person is going to be much closer of a friend. There's a thing, one of my friends, he was in let's call it the Eastern European Mafia, pretty much. Okay. And he said, look, the best friend you will ever have is the guy that fucks up and tries to correct it. And acknowledges why he fucked up and tries to fix it. You'll never be able to trust anybody more than that person. He said, this is why the mafia, that type of group is so fucking tight. Because like, if you fuck up enough, like it's bad. I don't know. I don't even know because I'm not in that world. I don't know, but I know it's bad. But if you fuck up and you're redeemed and you're recovered, holy shit, you become in. And there's a certain amount of respect and earning trust, because the people who are involved in that type of world, I used to think of it like I've had friends and people who are on the shadier side of that world, but the thing that I learned through my experiences of these people is they're actually some of the best people and the most trustworthy people you'll ever meet in life. And it just goes to show that sometimes the people who are quote unquote good, who follow the rules, who do everything right, are not necessarily as honest, trustworthy, and solid as the people who bend the law or sometimes break the law. Now, caveat, sometimes people who do break and bend the law are very toxic, corrupt people. And I'm not making a blanket statement here, but there's a lot of people who bend the law more because they're critical thinkers and they see a corrupt system and they work within the boundaries or just outside of the boundaries of corruption. And so they benefit from it in a sense of intelligence. Not in that they want to do bad things or hurt anybody, but they see that things are fucked up and skewed against them. And so they're willing to bend the law or work outside of the law a little bit with potential risks.
Yeah.
But anyway, this is my point. My point is that you have trust is so much more important when you do that, because you could be taken down by the wrong people being around you, right? Because you have to trust people so much more. So anyway,
no, I was just thinking about it because it's because this is like the second time round
Sopranos
we're talking about, and it was something I was thinking about earlier in the conversation. It's like, what is it about that story? Like what is our fascination with that story? And that sort of criminal element, and there's so many.
Can I step in one thing? I'm just one thing. A rat, but we all can recognize we don't like a fucking rat because it's betrayal. Right? That's so much of what Sopranos is about. It's a rat, right? Like that's a big part of the story. But the thing is even though we're not, I feel like I cut you off. I'm really sorry. I really am. I call it ADHD there because I fucking had to say it. But anyway, the thing about it, I think that we appreciate about these mafia or criminal stories like Breaking Bad and stuff is we appreciate the fact that there's such an amount of trust that exists.
Yeah. I mean, I think that there can be a number of things because like you're saying, there can be that thing of like brotherhood, like of that we feel is so sometimes I think missing, in our own lives. Just like, whoa, here's people who like under the most like literally life and death stakes and are there for each other, and there's something about that. And I think that there's also something about our hatred of the system and our hatred of the machine, as we've been saying. And I also want to give a shout out to a guy by the name of Paul Kingsnorth, because he's really kind of got me on this whole machine train in terms of that. So but I think that that's a big element of it too, is these people who, because I think that, we're getting into the weeds and we should probably start wrapping things up now. But, I think that one of the things that attracts us so much about that story and stories about rebels and things like that and outlaws and things is because I think there's a part of us that hates the system that we're in so much. You can even, to a lesser, more comedic degree, you can look at something like Office Space, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like, this like the working man's fantasy of just being like, I don't fucking care, and just like suddenly not like genuinely not giving two shits about your fucking job anymore, right? Why are we so attracted to these stories? And it's like, because there's this element of it reflects our hatred of the system that we're in. And gangsters are kind of the same way, because they're like, in some ways it's like they're gaming the system, right? And there's something so attractive about that, right? But it comes at a price, and that's always a part of the story. But anyhow, now we're getting into the weeds. Well, but it's
a great point. So let me say this before we kind of like wrap this baby up. I would say that there's something about this conversation, and I feel like we've been on this train a little bit, and maybe we'll carry on with some future ones. But this whole idea of the machine, it kind of comes back to that, and I think that the soul doesn't like to be put into the machine and to be defined by the machine. And I think that's why a lot of us, we're not happy with our jobs, and we're not happy with this type of stuff, because there's this like lack of fulfillment that can happen in there. And some people, they can go to their job and they can love their job and they can really enjoy it. And I think for those people that do, I think they found some type of resonance or connection in that routine, in that life. And I think if you can, I think that's fucking awesome, because ultimately your vocation, whatever you spend your time doing. I'll say this, sorry. When I was creating my course and I was building out the character development, because it was a big question. Like people were like, okay, well, it used to be, what was their job? And later I changed it to know, what's their vocation? What do they do with their time? because sometimes characters don't have a job. That's not what it's about. But the thing is if you have a job, you know, and your job is about making you money and doing this thing and building this thing or whatever, and sometimes it's building a business and sometimes it's a bunch of other things, who knows. But the thing is that if you're putting your time and attention towards something you care about, then that's good. And if you feel that even if you don't like what you do necessarily, but you get what you want out of it, then that's good. And you're spending your time in a way that works. But if you're doing something you hate and you're not getting what you want out of it, and this is something that's happening in our society right now, where people are doing jobs they hate and not making very much money, and they can't afford to fucking pay their rent or their food and shit. And this is happening in Vancouver specifically. And I know other places in the world, but Vancouver, a big deal right now. And people are like, fuck this shit. I'm not going to I don't want to work a job, and I don't want to live here, and I don't want to do this shit because this is bullshit. And people are getting upset about it because first of all, I'm not doing something I want to do, and then I'm not even getting what I want to get. So fuck that, right? And so this is where, for those people who, if you're in that spot, to me, this conversation is very much about that. Great. I would look at that as I would be like, fucking thank you, God. Like, thank you for giving me this fucking feeling of I'm fed the fuck up with this. Because this is where you're going to access your soul. This is where you're going to get in touch with art. This is where you're going to, you know, you've been doing all the right points. You went to school, you did the thing, and then you're still in debt, and you can't pay for your fucking apartment, you can't eat, and you're like, what the fuck? And I can't even go out on a date because I can't even afford a date, you know, all that type of shit that's going on for people. And you go, I'm done with that. And then you fill in all those gaps because you've been doing all the points, right? And the machine loves the points. But this is where art exists. Art exists in that point where it's like beyond the point, right? And then it might make you do different points, or you might do the same points but in a different way now. And whatever way you go, I think it's good. I think it's a win. But I do, you know, my dad used to say something when I was younger, and my dad's not a perfect guy, and I have lots of positive and negative things to say about it. But I'll say one thing that he used to say, which I think he was right about, and I'm sure he got this from somewhere else, but it was like, enough pain and you will change. And I found that to be very true in my life. And so I've really aimed to look at pain as a gift and not some threat to my livelihood. Is like, if it is a threat to my livelihood, that is maybe in a rare occasion it is, but most of the time pain is giving me the opportunity to shift, transition, change, evolve. And we need pain a lot of the time to do it. Otherwise we just won't.
Yeah. Pain's not a thing that's meant to be something that you stick in. It's meant to be a guidepost, like not this way.
Not this way. Not this way. Yeah.
Let's talk about beer, and I feel like I'll go into some closing comments right after.
Dude, I'm enjoying this beer. I got to tell you, it's like mango orange juice. I'm just like, this is so tasty. Yeah. I like nearly crushed the whole thing, and we're like on those last sips, I'm like saving it for talking about it.
I saw this one, and I just like, it just grabbed my attention. I mean, this can, it's just like, you know, this orange and yellow, like this just, and yeah, it's the so for everyone, we're drinking the Mojo Mango Orange Gosa from Phillips Brewing, and my God, it is
tasty.
So tasty. This is one of the best Gosas I think I've ever had. It's so delicious.
It's so good, man. I've just enjoyed it so much. I mean, it is a little bit, I would say, like, you know, it's not an everyday necessarily like thing, but it's a treat. Yeah. It's like, and honestly, like, I could have another one and I would still be happy with it. And for a beer that's this flavorful, I tend to find that usually it's like one, and then I'm like, hey, that was good. That was a nice touch. But this one, I'm enjoying it so much. I'm like, man, I could have another and I would still enjoy that. I don't know if I would have a third. I'm not sure. I'm not there yet. But I can tell you that, like, if a tasty beer like this can get me to say I'll have another, that's a pretty good win.
Yeah. And it's not a paid sponsorship by any means. But hey, Phillips, you know, if you're listening, we
appreciate it.
We appreciate it. All right, so let's do some closing comments here on this really tasty conversation.
Yeah, nice.
And I just kind of wanted to pick up on something that you had said there just before. And, you know, soul is a part of this title, and you said, like, for some people that word can be a bit of a dirty word for some people, and I always encourage, that you try and find some way in which you can hear noise outside, people. It's we're here in a beautiful part, just got the window open, beautiful late, end of summer kind of day.
Yeah.
But this thing of soul, and you're talking about, this part of you that can sometimes just get so fed up and just so done with something that's happening in your life and the way that things are going, and finding a sense of gratitude in that emotion and in that discovery. And that soul is, I would say, in that moment, is speaking to you in that moment. And that soul you can think of as the truest thing about you. What is the truest thing about you? And sometimes it takes that pain for suddenly you just be like, you know what? I'm sick of this shit. I am sick of this rat race. I'm done. Right? Whew. It's like it took that emotion, it took that anger for the soul to wake you up. That truest part of yourself is like, I don't want this.
Yeah.
I thought I wanted this. I don't want this shit. And the last thing that I want to say is, for everybody, is to, I really hope that through some of the things that we were saying, and I'll just say it again one more time, is let yourself engage with the art that you engage with in your life in a deeper way. Don't just look for the entertainment. Dive into the meaning. Have conversations about some of the things that you're already taking in, because you'll often find that there's so much more substance and meaning and things that it's there to give you, right? That will actually nourish and energize you. And it might feel a little bit exhausting at first, like I'm so tired, I've just got back from work, don't get me wrong, I don't fault anybody for that. I've been there where sometimes I just need to turn this off for a second, I just need to turn off for a few moments. But I think that we're just doing that too much now. And re-engaging with really great art again, and finding the myths that it's, and the wisdom that is often contained within it, because that's often where we find beauty. And once we start get used to working those muscles again, it becomes easier and easier and easier to do that thing. And there's wonder on the other side of it. There's more wonder to be had in our lives, I think, when we begin to engage with art in that way again. So please, 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 please do.
Yeah, I it's been such a great talk that it's hard to find the final point to wrap it up with. For me, I would say maybe engage with your soul, or if you don't like calling it a soul, maybe call it source or something, that, you have access to something that is whatever it is. I mean, I always like to think of it, I had this awareness a while ago, but I like to think of it as light when it shines through kind of a glass object has
like
a
prism.
refraction. Yeah, a prism has a refraction, and that and the way it's hit, it refracts the light into a certain way. And I think that each of us are like that. We have some type of source energy that's coming through us, and we interpret it and then we put it out a certain way. And if you can begin to enjoy the experience of how you refract and how you perceive and how you interpret, and just be in amazement of that, and get to know your soul, how does it how does it work? How does it process this world? And what does it care about and seem to, you know, what does it look like when something kind of hits me? And I think the interesting thing about this conversation as well is that if you can give yourself some grace, you'll realize that like nothing is wrong. Like when I was in my most depressed, man, was it brutal. But at the same time, I look back and I go, so necessary. And, you know, if you're in a depressed place, I mean, my advice is always to say, like, make the decision that if you don't want to be there, that you're going to get out, and you will. I mean, I did. I'm living proof, man. Like, you know, and anybody that convinces you that you're stuck there, that's some type of mental illness or something that you're just stuck with, like adamantly don't agree with that. Look, you can argue me and you can say, look, no, I have a chemical imbalance. I am this way. This is just how I am. And you know what? You'll be right. And this is what I learned, is that whatever you decide, you'll be right. And I had the luxury of, when I was in university and college, I studied a bunch of different arts classes, mostly because I had to study something before they let me in the frickin' film program. So one of the studies that I learned a little bit about was anthropology. And something that I learned that was really interesting about anthropology was it studies a lot of these like tribes and people that, like, you know, live outside of the normal culture or whatever. And what they found was that if people believe something, it tended to be true. It tended to work. And so they found that these tribes, like, even though they can't scientifically like back it up, and even though it's like technically this doesn't really work logically, because they believed it, it did work. And it's this placebo nocebo effect. It's the same thing. So my thing is, I look at it and I go, well, my belief system seems to be this, and my life exists because I be and live as though this is so. And so the first thing you want to do before you even change anything is to acknowledge this is how I'm being and living, because this is what I believe. And then you go, do I like this? Do I like this belief? Do I like this refraction? Do I like this interpretation of the world? And if you don't, then you go, well, what would I like if I was given the opportunity to refract in a way that I would, and then begin to be and live as though that's so. And, you know, people call these fancy names. They say, well, it's manifestation, and it's like, you know, it's willpower, and it's all this shit. It's like, well, sure. Yeah. Yeah, it is. But the thing is like, man, like, you are creating your world. You're telling the story. You're, you know, you look out the window and you either see the dirt or you see the sun. I mean, what do you look at, you know? And if you don't like what you're looking at, stop looking at it and look at something else. And I tell you, you look at the right thing, you will go towards the right thing. And here's the last thing I'll say. I just learned how to ride a motorcycle, and I've been having a blast. I've been cruising around. One lesson that you learn in motorcycle school is you look where you want to go. And they call it like object fixation. Sometimes we see a danger and we get focused on it. And you actually will head towards the danger. So you have to have the discipline of look where you want to go and trust that if you're looking where you want to go, you will go that way. And it's so much like life. If you focus on the danger, if you focus on the things that will get you in trouble, you will end up in those places. And so, you know, one of the things that was one of the hardest ones for me to do was doing a U-turn. And at pace, it's a little frightening because you're like leaning, it's like balance, like, you know, all this. But you got to look, you have to turn your head like right around and just look where you're going. Because if you get caught in like, I'm doing the corner and you're just kind of looking ahead of you, you fuck it up. And life's like that. So, you know, I think we have you know, this is my final point. I think we have our soul is an expression of ourselves, but sometimes I don't know if we've granted ourselves the true expression of what we know in our hearts, whatever that means for you, that we actually want to express our soul as. And our soul just honors whatever we decide to feed it. So you feed it the thing that you want it to manifest, build, create, whatever, interpret, and it will. And you are it, but at the same time, there's a part of you that it wants to be informed, and that's your art. Because you can look to the ditch and you will go to the ditch, or you can look to the horizon and you'll go to the horizon. So it's up to you at every moment. And this is art.
Thank you for listening in on our conversation today. We hope you found something helpful that you can carry forward with you. Head over to our website, wayoftheartist.com, for more free exclusive material and learn about the show. If you haven't already, please support us by subscribing to the show, sharing it with people you know, and keeping compassionate, creative conversation going.